Hey guys, how's it going? It's Blaze. Just got back this week from the Virginia Beach regionals, where I actually wasn't able to make it into the regional, but I did play the Treasure Cup, and I walked away from it really thinking that the balance of OP16 hasn't really been fixed at all from 15, and there is unfortunately a particularly big reason why that is. I don't know if everyone's going to agree with this. It's probably not the most controversial take because I think I've heard a lot of people talking about this kind of for a while now. Yellow as a color in One Piece is kind of exploiting a fundamental issue with the rules and with card design as it exists right now, and it's piling up on itself how bad this issue compounds. I think at a local level, I was seeing it as kind of unfortunate, but you know, what are you gonna do? It's not the biggest deal ever. It's a little bit unbalanced. But having gone into a large scale tournament in this meta and kind of seeing how that plays out now, I do think that it's an issue that compounds on itself over the course of long tournaments as well, particularly with how the competitive rules currently are worded. Once again though, gotta shout out our homies over at Binge Party TCG. You can get this amazing custom Oda, Sig, Luffy binder. All you gotta do, like, comment, subscribe. You will be entered into the pool for the drawing. We'll probably do the drawing next month. In addition, you can also win the OP16 Luffy alt art. I thought it would just be fun to like throw a Luffy card in with the Luffy binder. But yeah, that's in my binder, my other binder in my backpack in the other room. And I'm not going up to get that to show it off on camera. Go look at one of my other videos, or my last video to this, I guess, if you want to see what that looks like. But yeah, so, okay. Try to collect my thoughts here. Currently, the way that the One Piece card game is designed is it's a game about card advantage over several zones, right? And I know, well, technically that's any card game, right? But One Piece really crystallizes the way card advantage works into like a calculatable equation. And that's what makes the game so cool, because it's kind of this ever shifting math puzzle that you're trying to solve for X while Y is changing in front of you as it's reacting to you, right? So if you think about the way that the One Piece card game works, like what are the most important things? Well, obviously your hand is very important. How many cards you have in your hand is a big source of advantage in the One Piece card game. But then also what you have on board, probably the other biggest source of advantage in the game. However, if you consider the way that life works in this game, despite the fact that you only have 4 to 5 or even 3 of those life cards over there, probably maximum at any given time, life cards are unique in that when they leave the life zone, they come directly into your hand. So you are actually creating very little advantage shift in terms of the overall cards that are available in their current game state, right? So when you have a color that's based around life, it does create a balancing issue of when I'm adding a card to my life, am I creating just 1 point of advantage? Well, no, not really. You're also kind of creating a second one because you're taking that life to your hand in the future, and it could also have a trigger. And then you're putting that onto bodies that hit the board. It's kind of the opposite problem of black, where black became very overpowered because you had a lot of bodies that were hitting the board and immediately removing one of the opponent's bodies. So it was swinging the game very hard every time this would happen. And what yellow's kind of fallen into is a similar thing, but in the opposite direction, where you're playing bodies, that creates a point of advantage. You're putting out a life card, that creates a point of advantage. And then the life card's coming to your hand or triggering or playing out another body or doing some kind of other thing or removing something. And that's creating another point of advantage. And then you start printing these sorts of things onto bodies that are like non-interactable, right? So you have something like the Nico Robin, something like the Nami, which are cards that directly punish the other player for trying to even out the board advantage, right? So from a game design perspective, do you want to be punishing your player for trying to even out the board advantage when you are playing into a style of design that makes going for life kind of bad in a lot of situations, right? There's a lot of chances for stacked triggers that can really like screw yourself over if you do attack life. But One Piece is very swingy, right? So, and because of the way it's so advantage driven, it's very swingy because you need to be chipping your opponent down pretty much at all times, or they'll capitalize on that to get way ahead and just crush you. And that's why, like, you don't see a lot of turns where like no swings happen in One Piece. It can happen, but it's very rare. And if you go a turn without swinging at all, that's usually not a good thing. So when we consider all of that in terms of the game design around Yellow, and then you have cards like Borsalino. Yes, I do have to bring up Borsalino because what he does, I said this back when Borsalino like first came out, and I think it's even more true now, which is that like Rayquaza made it insane. Obviously Rayquaza made it so obvious that it had to be banned that it's not even funny. But Borsalino himself, just being a 5 cost, creating a situation in the late game where if you play 2 Borsalinos, you've gone up 2 in advantage on the board, right? You also have 2 blocks now, and then you also have 2 cards that are in your life that are then going to go to your hand. That's like +6 if you think about it in that way, right? So being able to have a turn where you just go +6 in a very defensively like advantaged play style is already crazy. And then I think something that we really got to talk about is how that particular interaction works off of the way that time rules work in One Piece. So anybody who's not familiar with how competitive time rules work in One Piece, there is a system where once you are in overtime, you have an additional 5 minutes, but on top of that, you have a 0, 1, 2, 3 system. So a 0, 1, 2, 3 system is when the overtime clock goes over, so that you're into overtime. Whoever is currently the active player, whoever's turn it is then, is turn 0. And then it goes their opponent 1, back to them 2, their opponent 3. After all that is concluded, it immediately goes to total life cards remaining. What's like the best deck in the game? And what is its kind of main thing that it gets to do? Well, they're able to add to their life. So when you have a combo, or you have a 2 card, it's not even a combo, it's just play the same card twice. 10 Don, you play 2 Borsalinos, you go, I have 2 blockers, and I have 2 life, and I have potentially triggers there too that can like deny swings or freeze things. Well, you create such an advantage swing if you do this in overtime that the game effectively almost instantly becomes unwinnable because of the 0, 1, 2, 3 rule. If your opponent on 0 has you set up for like lethal next turn, let's say, and you're on the 1, right? You play out your 2 Borsalinos, you wall up, it goes back to their turn 2. This is the last turn they have where it's possible to win the game. If they swing at you, there's almost no chance that they're going to get through 5 swings. You've gone from 0. So when if you play it at 0, you're at 0 swing. They need 1 swing to hit you, to kill you. You do that, you're at 5. You've gone from 1 to 5 instantly because it's 1 swing, 1 Borsa, 1 swing, 2nd Borsa, 1 swing, 1st life, 1 swing, 2nd life, 5th swing is the game closer at 0 life, right? So when you're doing that on the turn 1 in overtime, it's only going back to them for turn 2. And then if by some way they manage to even out the game in turn 2, well, guess what? You can attack their life again, or even just play another card that heals on your turn 3 to continue making it so that the life threshold will always be called in your favor when overtime ends. It's an effectively unbeatable strategy. Unless the player who is in this situation playing the 2 Borsalinos is somehow so far behind or so card starved in hand, like maybe it's their last 2 cards and the opponent has a full board. That's like the only situation where you don't just automatically win for doing that. I'm making it a little more. There are situations, there's stuff that goes unblockable, there's stuff that taps stuff down, there's ways to remove. You're not always going to get both of those Borsalino blocks out of them, but it is going to force your opponent to use resources to try to deal with them. And yeah, unless you have an insanely good lethal setup, you're probably just going to lose off of this one play because of how the rules work. So to me personally, I think when you have a style of card design that is directly playing into how the rules work to promote a style of play that is uninteractive and in many cases just unwinnable, you don't really have a counterplay for this. That to me is where we push over from strategy into game exploit. And it is Bandai's responsibility to not have the game be exploitable. Now, I'm talking in video game terms here. Obviously, I'm working in video games. I'm not a tabletop game designer, but I do work in game design. And this is exactly the kind of thing that you really want to avoid in a multiplayer game. This is the most difficult thing about making a multiplayer game, is that people will figure out how to exploit it. So I really think Bandai has to change this, and there's only really two ways to do that. One of them is to change how overtime rules work. This is a potentially viable thing. I know that Yu-Gi-Oh! Had some issues with lockdown strategies and overtime rules being manipulated and exploited in the past. And the way that they solved it was to make it so that if you go 2-time in overtime without a clear winner being decided, double game loss. Both players take 2 game losses for that round. I'm not sure how successful this would be in a game like One Piece, and I don't think it would be particularly well received to have competitive records be instantly obliterated by the fact that cards are designed in a way where it's actually fairly easy, particularly with yellow, to put the game into a state where there's no way to finish within the 0, 1, 2, 3 overtime turn limit. So I don't know how I feel about the idea of making it a double game loss. The other thing is they can ban Borsalino. This seems pretty likely to me. I feel like this is a card that has to get banned. It's way too generic. It's way too exploitable. But I don't think banning a single card to me is like a solution to the problem that this has revealed. I think that there does need to be a moment where Bandai looks at the way that they're designing yellow cards and rethinks their strategy in terms of game design. We already have a color that does everything, and it's called purple. And it does make it a very exploitable color at times, but right now it has the insane brokenness of yellow limiting it. Yellow needs to lock in more on decks having actual identities and not being as much of just these major staple cards being so exploitable. I think that what we're seeing with like the Big Mom deck for OP17 is already moving a bit more into this direction, where it's like, okay, Big Mom's whole thing is making choices. We're making you choose in what way the life manipulation is going to take place, right? But I think decks do need to be able to decide, like, what is the identity of this deck. In the case of something like Teach, where it's more about trigger and on KO manipulation, or the yellow Moria deck, I think that that is a good way to take yellow. I actually think that requires a lot of skill, and it isn't just spamming out incredibly overpowered healed cards and good stuff piling the way that, for example, Nami is able to do right now. The design of Boa I'm a little less hot on, but I think it's fine, I guess. At least it has an identity, even if its identity is you can't touch my board ever. I think that's not great either. I think, we could do a little better than that. But decks need to either be like, you can't interact with my board, I'm going to heal a lot, I'm going to have triggers, and I'm going to manipulate those triggers, or like weird Vegapunky style stuff, right? I think it's a problem when we have these decks that are like, I'm going to heal every turn, I'm going to burn your life at the same time, I'm also going to have a completely uninteractable board that you take damage if you touch, and then also I have triggers that stun all your stuff. Also, my leader goes to 7k. Also, I'm constantly drawing cards anytime anybody takes damage. Also, I have, you know, big wall defensive strategies I can do that also heal me more. At this point, you actually are doing too much. Now, I know that people would say, oh, well, purple does the same thing. And yeah, I do think purple being able to do anything does make the cards kind of exploitable at times. But purple has a designed system from the jump that works off of the rule of why it's allowed to do everything, right? Purple's allowed to do everything because it's, quote unquote, going negative in its total resource pool all the time, right? And you can say all you will, oh, they break that rule all the time, and yeah, they do. And in some cases, like RP Law, you know, it does break the game. But something like a Nell, you know, well, it's recycling all the Don, yeah, but it is going to a lower total Don threshold. There's always, purple was always taxed in some kind of legitimately meaningful way on its resources in a way that yellow isn't. When yellow gets to the end of a big turn where they played out a bunch of big bodies, they still have 10 Don to attach to them next turn, you know? They can still swing you down from really high numbers. And I think it gets to a point where we gotta take a step back and we gotta look at like the way that yellow cards are being designed, and we gotta focus more on leader locking these yellow cards into specific play styles that are based off of something more like, well, this is a trigger stacking deck. Well, this is a I'm gonna heal a whole bunch defensive type of deck, if those should even exist. This is like a life burn deck or something like that. We had yellow decks that were like Yellow Kid and Vegapunk and stuff like that. I think that was actually pretty cool design. But anyway, yep, this is just my feelings about OP16 and the current state of yellow card design from a guy that went X4 and dropped out of a Treasure Cup playing Pinel because, you know, half of his matchups were into yellow decks with a 30% possible win rate in the matchup. So, yes, I am biased against this color. I will fully admit to that. I will fully acknowledge that that is where I'm coming from right now and why I'm making this video. But you know what? I talked to other people about my feelings about this, even other yellow players, and I'm not hearing a lot of people arguing against it. I think it's time for there to be a change in the way that yellow exists in the metagame of this card game, for it to be not as exploitable, for it not to be as generically good with staples that are, you know, swinging the game state so consistently in every single deck that you just know what you're in for when you match into one of these decks in a way that feels less like playing a game and more like being told you're not allowed to play the game. So again, I think we will probably see a shift here. This is kind of the way that I think people felt about black about a year ago, and they definitely shifted the way that color works in terms of its design to kind of compensate. Looks like the next real problem color is potentially going to be green now, so I guess it's time for green to have its big moment in the spotlight. So that's going to be fun. All right, y'all, appreciate you coming by. Once again, like, subscribe, leave a comment down below. I just like talking to y'all about this stuff too. It is a lot of fun. And until the next one, peace.